This is Informer News, your voice of the people. Timeline is Sunday the 26th of October 2014. Welcome along, my friends, to another edition of Informer News. Coming up in this week's broadcast, the Hollow Earth. Norwegian eyewitnesses who travelled to the inner earth and met a wonderful race of an advanced giant race who inhabit a paradise on earth. And incredible buildings that are built with special regards to strength, durability, beauty and symmetry. And massive forests of giant trees and lush oceans, a pure Garden of Eden. Also, Planet X orbits back and forth between two suns that is being monitored to this day, that will create the most destructive event to occur on planet Earth in the past 3,000 plus years. Are you ready to experience the ride of your life as the poles shift? And an insider's latest images of Nibiru. Okay, into this week's news. The following extracts originate from atlanteangardens.blogspot.co.uk, titled Journey to the Inner Earth, the Smoky God. Olaf Jansson's story, posted on Saturday, April 12, 2014. My name is Olaf Jansson. I am a Norwegian. Although I was born in the little seafaring Russian town of Ulsberg on the eastern coast of the Gulf of Bothnia, the northern arm of the Baltic Sea. My parents were on a fishing cruise in the Gulf of Bothnia and put into this Russian town of Ulsberg at the time of my birth, being the 27th day of October 1811. My father, Jens Jansson, was born at Rodwig on the Scandinavian coast, near the Lofoten Islands, but after marrying made his home at Stockholm, because my mother's people resided in that city. When 7 years old, I began going with my father on his fishing trips along the Scandinavian coast. Early in life, I displayed an aptitude for books, and at the age of 9 years was placed in a private school in Stockholm, remaining there until I was 14. After this, I made regular trips with my father on all his fishing voyages. My father was a man fully 6 feet 3 in height and weighed over 15 stone, a typical Norseman of the most rugged sort and capable of more endurance than any other man I have ever known. He possessed the gentleness of a woman in tender little ways, yet his determination and willpower were beyond description. His will admits no defeat. I was in my 19th year when we started on what proved to be our last trip as fishermen, in which resulted in the strange story that shall be given to the world. But not until I have finished my earthly pilgrimage. I dare not allow the facts as I know them to be published while I am living, for fear of further humiliation, confinement and suffering. First of all, I was put in irons by the captain of the whaling vessel that rescued me, for no other reason than that I told the truth about the marvellous discoveries made by my father and myself. But this was far from being the end of my torture. After 4 years and 8 months' absence, I reached Stockholm, only to find my mother had died the previous year, and the property left to my parents in the possession of my mother's people, but it was at once made over to me. All might have been well had I erased from my memory the story of our adventure and of my father's terrible death. Finally, one day I told the story in detail to my uncle Gustav Osterlind, a man of considerable property, and urged him to fit out an expedition for me to make another voyage to the strange land. It must be remembered the time of which I write was the autumn of 1829, and we of the outside surface of the earth knew nothing then, so to speak, of electricity. The electrically surcharged condition of the air was a constant vitalizer. I never felt better in my life than during the 2 years my father and I sojourned on the inside of the earth. To resume my narrative of events, the ship in which we were sailing came to a stop 2 days after we had been taken on board. My father said, as nearly as he could judge, we were directly under Stockholm or London. The city we had reached was called Jehu, signifying a seaport. The houses were large and beautifully constructed, and quite uniform in appearance, yet without sameness. The principal occupation of the people appeared to be agriculture. The hillsides were covered with vineyards, while the valleys were devoted to the growing of grain. I never saw such a display of gold. It was everywhere. The door castings were inlaid, and the tables were veneered with sheetings of gold. Domes of the public buildings were of gold. It was used most generously in the finishings of the great temples of music. Vegetation grew in lavish exuberance, and the fruit of all kinds possessed the most delicate flavour. Clusters of grapes 4 and 5 feet in length, each grape as large as an orange, the apples larger than a man's head, typified the wonderful growth of all things on the inner side of the earth. The great redwood trees of California would be considered mere underbrush compared with the giant forest trees extending for miles and miles in all directions. In many directions along the foothills of the mountains where vast herds of cattle were seen during the last day of our travel on the river. We heard much of a city called Eden, but were kept at Jehu for an entire year. By the end of that time we had learned to speak fairly well the language of this strange race of people. Our instructors, Julius Galdier and his wife, exhibited a patience that was truly commendable. One day an envoy from the ruler of Eden came to see us, and for 2 whole days my father and myself were put through a series of surprising questions. They wished to know from whence we came, what sort of people dwelt without, what God was worshipped, our religious beliefs, the mode of living in our strange land, and 1,000 other things. The compass which we had brought with us attracted special attention. My father and I commented between ourselves on the fact that the compass still pointed north, although we knew that we had sailed over the curve or edge of the Earth's aperture and were far along southwards on the inside surface of the Earth's crust, which according to my father's estimates and my own is about 300 miles in thickness from the inside to the outside surface. Relatively speaking, it is no thicker than an egg shell, so that there is almost as much surface on the inside as on the outside of the Earth. The great luminous cloud or ball of dull red fire, fiery red in the mornings and evenings during the day, giving off a beautiful white light. The smoky god is seemingly suspended in the centre of the great vacuum within the earth and held to its place by the immutable law of gravitation or a repellent atmospheric force, as the case may be. I refer to the known power that draws or repels with equal force in all directions. The base of this electrical cloud or central luminary, the seat of the gods, is dark and non-transparent, save for innumerable small openings, seemingly in the bottom of the great support or altar of the deity, upon which the smoky god rests, and the light shining through these many openings twinkle at night in all their splendour, and seem to be stars as natural as the stars we saw shining when in our home at Stockholm, excepting that they appear larger. The smoky god, therefore, with each daily revolution of the earth, appears to come up in the east and go down in the west, the same as does our sun on the external surface. In reality, the people within believe that the smoky god is the throne of their Jehovah and is stationary. The effect of night and day is therefore produced by the earth's daily rotation. I have since discovered that the language of the people of the inner world is much like Sanskrit. After we have given an account of ourselves to the emissary from the central seat of government of the inner continent, and my father had, in his crude way, drawn maps at their request of the outside surface surface of the earth, showing divisions of land and water, and giving the name of each of the continents, larger islands, and the oceans, we were taken over land to the city of Eden in a conveyance different from anything we have in Europe or America. This vehicle was doubtless some electrical contrivance. It was noiseless and ran on a single iron rail in perfect balance. The trip was made at a very high rate of speed. We were carried up hills and down dales, across valleys, and again along the sides of steep mountains, without any apparent attempt having been made to level the earth as we do for railroad tracks. The car seats were huge, yet comfortable affairs. We were high above the floor of the car. On the top of each car were high-geared flywheels lying on their sides, which were so automatically adjusted that as the speed of the car increased, the high speed of these flywheels geometrically increased. Jules Galdier explained to us that these revolving fan-like wheels on top of the cars destroyed atmospheric pressure, or what is generally understood by the term gravitation, and with this force thus destroyed or rendered nugatory, the car is as safe from falling to one side or to other from the single rail track as if it were in a vacuum. The flywheels, in their rapid revolutions, destroying effectuality, the so-called power of gravitation, or the force of atmospheric pressure, or whatever potent influence it may be that causes all unsupported things to fall down to the earth's surface or to the nearest point of resistance. The surprise of my father and myself was indescribable when, amid the regal magnificence of a spacious hall, we were finally brought before the great high priest, ruler over all the land. He was richly robed and much taller than those about him, and could not have been less than 14 or 15 feet in height. The immense room in which we were received seemed finished in solid slabs of gold, thickly studded with jewels of amazing brilliancy. The city of Eden is located in what seems to be a beautiful valley, yet in fact it is on the loftiest mountain plateau of the inner continent, several thousand feet higher than any portion of the surrounding country. It is the most beautiful place I've ever beheld in all my travels. In this elevated garden, all manners of fruits, vines, shrubs, trees, and flowers grow in riotous profusion. In this garden, 4 rivers have their source in a mighty artesian fountain. They divide and flow in 4 directions. The place is called by the inhabitants the navel of the earth, or the beginning, the cradle of the human race. The names of the rivers were the Euphrates, the Pison, and Gihon, and the Hiddekel 17. And the Lord God planted a garden, and out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight, and good for food. The book of Genesis. The unexpected awaited us in this palace of beauty, in the finding of our little fishing craft. It had been brought before the high priest in perfect shape, just as if it had been taken from the water that day when it was loaded on board the ship by the people who discovered us on the river more than a year before. We were given an audience of over 2 hours with this great dignitary, who seemed kindly disposed and considerate. He showed himself eagerly interested, asking us numerous questions, and invariably regarding things about which his emissaries had failed to inquire. At the conclusion of the interview, he inquired our pleasure, asking us whether we wished to remain in his country or if we preferred to return to the outer world, providing it was possible to make a successful return trip across the frozen belt barriers that encircled both the south and north openings of the earth. My father replied, "It would please me and my son to visit your country and see your people, your colleges and palaces of music and art, your great fields, your wonderful forests of timber, and after we have had this pleasurable privilege, we should like to return to our home on the outside surface of the earth. This son is my only child, and my good wife will be wearily awaiting our return." "I fear you can never return," replied the chief high priest, "because the way is a most hazardous one. However, you shall visit the different countries with Julius Gallier as your escort, and be accorded every courtesy and kindness whenever you are ready to attempt a return voyage. I assure you that your boat, which is here on expedition, shall be put in the water of the river Hiddekel at its mouth, and we will bid you Jehovah's speed. Thus terminated our only interview with the high priest or ruler of the continent. We learn that the males do not marry before they are from 75 to 100 years old, and that the age at which women enter wedlock is only a little less, and that both men and women frequently live to be from 600 to 800 years old, and in some instances much older. 18 Josephus says, God prolonged the life of the patriarchs that preceded the deluge, both on account of their virtues and to give them the opportunity of perfecting the sciences of geometry and astronomy, which they had discovered, which they could not have done if they had not lived 600 years, because it is only after the lapse of 600 years that the great year is accomplished. During the following year, we visited many villages and towns, prominent among them being the city of Nige, Delphi and Hecate, and my father was called upon no less than half a dozen times to go over the maps which had been made from the rough sketches he had originally given of the diversions of land and water on the outside surface of the earth. I remember hearing my father remark that the giant race of people in the land of the smoky god had almost as accurate an idea of the geography of the outside surface of the earth as had the average college professor in Stockholm. In our travels we came to a forest of giant trees near the city of Delphi. Had the Bible said that there were trees towering over 300 feet in height and more than 30 feet in diameter growing in the Garden of Eden, the Ingersolls, the Tom Paines and Voltaires would doubtless have pronounced these statements a myth. Yet this is the description of the California Sequoia gigantea. But these Californian giants pale into insignificance when compared with the forest Goliaths found in the within continents, where abound mighty trees from 800 to 1,000 feet in height and from 100 to 120 feet in diameter, countless in numbers and forming forests extending hundreds of miles back from the sea. The people are exceedingly musical and learned to a remarkable degree in their arts and sciences, especially geometry and astronomy. Their cities are equipped with vast palaces of music, where not infrequently as many as 25,000 lusty voices of this giant race swell forth in mighty choruses of the most sublime symphonies. The children are not supposed to attend institutions of learning before they are 20 years old. Then their school life begins and continues for 30 years, 10 of which are uniformly devoted by both sexes to the study of music. Their principal vocations are architecture, agriculture, horticulture, the raising of vast herds of cattle, and the building of conveyances peculiar to their country for travel on land and water by some device which I cannot explain. They hold communion with one another between the most distant parts of their country on air currents. All buildings are erect with special regard to strength, durability, beauty and symmetry, and with a style of architecture vastly more attractive to the eye than any I have ever observed elsewhere. About 3/4 of the inner surface of the earth is land and about 1/4 water. There are numerous rivers of tremendous size, some flowing in a northerly direction and others southerly. Some of these rivers are 30 miles in width, and it is out of these vast waterways at the extreme northern and southern parts of the inside surface of the earth, in regions where low temperatures are experienced, experienced that freshwater icebergs are formed. They are then pushed out to sea like huge tongues of ice by the abnormal freshets of turbulent waters that twice every year sweep everything before them. Whether inland among the mountains or along the seashore, we found bird life prolific. When they spread their great wings, some of the birds appear to measure 30 feet from tip to tip. They are of great variety and many colours. We were permitted to climb up on the edge of a rock and examine a nest of eggs. There were 5 in the nest, each of which was at least 2 feet in length and 15 inches in diameter. After we had been in the city of Hecate about a week, Professor Galdier took us to an inlet where we saw thousands of tortoises along the sandy shore. I hesitate to state the size of these great creatures. They were from 25 to 30 feet in length, from 15 to 20 feet in width, and fully 7 feet in height. When one of them projected its head, it had the appearance of some hideous sea monster. The strange conditions within are favourable not only for vast meadows of luxuriant grasses, forests of giant trees, and all manner of vegetable life, but wonderful animal life as well. One day we saw a great herd of elephants. There must have been 500 of these thunder-throated monsters, with their restlessly waving trunks. They were tearing huge boughs from the trees and trampling smaller growth into dust like so much hazel brush. They would average over 100 feet in length and from 75 to 85 feet in height. To view the full transcript, go to my website, endtimes23.com, where I've posted the link. There's a live link to my website near the end of this video. This next report, the timelines for this event were clearly wrong, but the information is excellent and should be taken note of. This following report originates from bibliotecappliedis.net, titled Destructive Brown Dwarf. Planet X's orbit takes it back and forth between two suns, by Mark Hazelwood from Metatech website. The other sun it orbits around is our sun's twin. Now, you might think that our solar system is not binary. Although most solar systems have been recently discovered to be binary, our sun does have a twin. It lies in the direction of Orion. It is not composed of the same material as our sun and thus will never ignite. It is a dark or dead sun and does not revolve around our sun like most twin suns do. Why hasn't this discovery been announced, you might ask? It has, if you know where to look. It's real simple why the information isn't more widely known. There's a brown dwarf star that orbits between both suns instead of around just one of them. Its orbit is rather long, being about 3,660 years, so we don't see it go by too often. It is still one of our family of planets in our solar system. It's like a half-brother that's been ostracized by its two parents, but still comes visiting habitually. X is kind of like the black sheep of our solar system's family. When it finally comes by for a visit, it just screws everything up and then leaves. It happens every time, so I guess the rep is well deserved. Now, stepping back away from humour, if you're going to try to keep a lid on the destructive brown dwarf, nothing kinky here, that's currently inbound, it's not a very good idea to notify John Q. Public about the relatively recently discovered second sun. That's one of the foci of its orbit. There's no reason to promote important clues if you don't have to. Besides, only very powerful and expensive scopes or deep space probes can see the other sun. This makes it fairly easy to keep it under wraps from the majority. This is one of the main reasons the orbiting Hubble telescope live feed is hidden from our view. Hubble was paid for with tax dollars, so you'd think they would give us a live peek, Nope, it's not going to happen. Diagram of our solar system includes the dead twin sun and the 10th planet, aka Planet X. This diagram appeared in the 1987 edition of the New Science and Inventions Encyclopedia, published by H.S. Studman, Westport, Connecticut, USA. The continuing conspiracy to cover up X falls short when matters of fact evidence is found in respected credible publications like this. The article accompanying this diagram, were discussing the purpose of the Pioneer 10 and 11 space probes, clearly show on the diagram are aka the 10th or 12th planet. The primary point made was to show the path of the two probes and how they created a triangulated sighting. The probes just happened to be verifying through this triangulation the sighting of Planet X. The history of deep space probes is mentioned because Pioneer 10 and 11 were said to be one of the first. There's absolutely no mention of any controversy about what was out there or what the probes were looking at. The disinformation to hide X's approach and long-known history of devastation it causes as it passes each time did not reach this far. It's not hard to imagine a conspiracy as large as this one. Just can't weed out all the evidence. It's a big world with a lot of people, publications and information sources, present and past. You know what could be a great thing about this cover-up? The information that it misses may get a bright light of emotion and attention shone on it that wouldn't normally have been there without the efforts of trying to hide it. There's a possibility if this information I present gets out quickly and broadly enough, there might be more people paying attention to X than if there was never any conspiracy to cover it up at all. That thought is just a hope and a prayer at this point. When a planet's orbit is between two suns instead of one, that orbit is a bit peculiar. It spends 99.99% of its time slowly going away from one of the suns after it passes it initially quickly to reach the halfway point. Then, as if falling like a rock off a cliff, the gravity of the sun it's approaching takes over, and in a relative flash it travels the other half of its journey. X reaches the halfway point after a little over 1800 years of travelling away from the dark sun towards our lit one. It only takes right about 3 years to travel the rest of the distance. In fact, the majority of its journey from halfway to here happens the last 9 months before it arrives. Zoom, it'll be cooking with its greatest speed by the time it passes. Once it crosses Pluto's orbit, it will only take about 90 days to pass right between Earth and the Sun. X's inbound approach is being closely monitored by our best telescope equipment on and off Earth, but now small private observatories have started spotting it. Ancient history revisited. Each time X approaches, it starts a chain of events that culminate with its passing by and causing our Earth's surface to change abruptly. These changes are the cause of massive death and destruction. History is rich with these stories. Ruins of past great civilizations stand as monuments to these past events. The legends of Atlantis, Lemuria, Mayans and several others going under the sea or abandoned can be completely explained by the regular passing of Planet X. Just off the coastlines of many lands exist remnants of great sophisticated societies such as found off Florida, Japan and the Mediterranean and more. To view the full transcript, go to my website endtimes23.com where I've posted the link. There's a live link to my website near the end of this video. Okay, my friends, you're all invited to join this channel by subscribing to End Times 23, which is a totally free subscription service. You're also invited to add me as a friend on Facebook and follow me on Twitter. If you'd like to drop me a line on my blog, by all means do so, or if you'd like to join one of my circles in Google+, the links are under this video. All this week's news links can be found on my website, endtimes23.com. There's a live link near the end of this video. Well, that's your lot for this week, my friends. I do hope you've enjoyed the show. I'll be back with you in a week's time with another edition of Cosmic News. So until then, this is your informer signing off, friends. I'll see you on the flip side. My name is Olaf Jansson. I am a Norwegian. Although I was born in the little seafaring Russian town of Ulsberg on the eastern coast of the Gulf of Bothnia, the northern arm of the Baltic Sea. My parents were on a fishing cruise in the Gulf of Bothnia and put into this Russian town of Ulsberg at the time of my birth, being the 27th day of October 1811. My father, Jens Jansson, was born at Rodwig on the Scandinavian coast, near the Lofoten Islands, but after marrying made his home at Stockholm, because my mother's people resided in that city. When 7 years old, I began going with my father on his fishing trips along the Scandinavian coast. Early in life, I displayed an aptitude for books, and at the age of 9 years was placed in a private school in Stockholm, remaining there until I was 14. After this, I made regular trips with my father on haulage fishing voyages. My father was a man fully 6 feet 3 in height and weighed over 15 stone, a typical Norseman of the most rugged sort and capable of more endurance than any other man I have ever known. He possessed the gentleness of a woman in tender little ways, yet his determination and willpower were beyond description. His will admits no defeat. I was in my 19th year when we started on what proved to be our last trip as fishermen, in which resulted in the strange story that shall be given to the world. But not until I have finished my earthly pilgrimage. I dare not allow the facts as I know them to be published while I am living, for fear of further humiliation, confinement, and suffering. First of all, I was built with special regards to strength, durability, beauty, and symmetry, and massive forests of giant trees and lush oceans, a pure Garden of Eden. Also, Planet X orbits back and forth between two suns that is being monitored to this day, that will create the most destructive event to occur on planet Earth in the past 3,000 plus years. Are you ready to experience the ride of your life as the poles shift? And an insider's latest images of Nibiru. Okay, into this week's news. The following extracts originate from atlanteangardens.blogspot.co.uk, titled Journey to the Inner Earth, the Smoky God, Olaf Jansson's story, posted on Saturday, April 12, 2014. This is Informer News, your voice of the people. Timeline is Sunday the 26th of October 2014. Welcome along, my friends, to another edition of Informer News. Coming up in this week's broadcast, the Hollow Earth. Norwegian eyewitnesses who travelled to the inner earth and met a wonderful race of an advanced giant race who inhabit a paradise on earth. And incredible buildings that have been irons by the captain of the whaling vessel that rescued me, for no other reason than that I told the truth about the marvellous discoveries made by my father and myself. But this was far from being the end of my torture. After 4 years and 8 months' absence, I reached Stockholm, only to find my mother had died the previous year, and the property left to my parents in the possession of my mother's people, but it was at once made over to me. All might have been well had I erased from my memory the story of our adventure and of my father's terrible death. Finally, one day I told the story in detail to my uncle Gustav Osterlind, a man of considerable property, and urged him to fit out an expedition for me to make another voyage to the strange land. It must be remembered the time of which I write was the autumn